Hello everybody, and welcome back to Clearblock Productions, and welcome to my new series on the channel, the Gregsville Collection. In this series, we'll go over all operations across the entire subdivision, and go into complete detail of different landmarks, yards, towns, and pass through current operations from Rose Yard to Gregsville Yard. In episode 1, we'll go over operations of mainline moves between Rose Yard and Gregsville Yard, with some run-through action as it comes along. The full tour from yard to yard will begin in next week's episode, so stay tuned. Let's get into it. We open up to a gorgeous golden morning in the sleepy town of Clarence. Clarence Junction, one of many famous spots along the route, carries two vital subdivisions through this very split. The Norfolk Southern Northbury District on the left side, and the Gregsville sub peeling off to the right, combined with the Canadian sub. We'll talk about that in a minute. The Gregsville sub has been going through very intensive maintenance and rebuilding, including right here in Clarence Junction, revising the track layout to allow for higher speeds through the turnout between the Gregsville sub and the Canadian Pacific Huntersburg sub. A curfew has been put on the route from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., forcing a lot more trains through during the day, so we're here at the perfect time to catch some action. We hear the roaring sound of two big GEs, and the scanner tells us it's NS-282, empty racks on their way to be loaded at the automotive ramp just outside of Gregsville proper. With a freshly rebuilt AC 4400 C6M leading the duo, the engineer has no problem pulling the short train through the turnout. With a BNSF AC 4400 CW second out, the train makes its way onto the Gregsville sub. At Kakini, a transfer yard about 8 miles south, it will take a right to stay on the Gregsville sub, traversing the many grades and hills between here and Gregsville. The scanner lights up with Q542, one of roughly 12 mixed manifest trains that shuttle traffic from Rose Yard to Gregsville Yard a day. It's big money and big traffic. This train was a little bit special though, because leading the 12,000 foot manifest train was the CSX Western Maryland Heritage Sticker locomotive, an ES44 DC number 5327. Following the special unit is an SD70M, which are quite rare on the CSX system nowadays, and a UP-9 from the 90s. Enjoy the gorgeous K5HL horn as the train rumbles through town. The heavy manifest train makes a loud noise as it slams over the freshly installed frog in the switch. A wide assortment of general goods rides along with the train, including rock hoppers, which will be dropped at Newman Gravel, more on that later, tank cars for the Carmen ethanol plant in Carmen, and other assorted cars like box cars, flat cars, and hoppers of all kinds. Included in this train is more empty auto racks for that automotive ramp I mentioned earlier. Looks like the workers there are going to have a busy day. Speaking of the Carmen ethanol plant, not 5 minutes after that train passes, we hear on the radio that a northbound NS Ethanol Train is headed our way. We jump about a half mile south to catch him at this industrial crossing. Waiting to be installed are these big triple head Vader signals. They are turned away from the cabs of the oncoming train to show that they're not active yet. The track crew still has another crossover to cut in before all the work at Clarence is done, but the sun is still up and the trains are still rolling. Something even more interesting to note in this shot is how unbelievably late the crossing gates activate. More on that in a second. Leading this ethanol train is one of EMD's massive SD70 ACUs, followed by some KCS foreign power, so enjoy. A CSX signal maintainer is scheduled to come and fix this faulty crossing later today. Recently, there's been a lot of extremely heavy rain, and a poorly insulated crossing circuit has messed with the electronics that enable the crossing gates to go down in time. Until then, the crossing has been blocked off from the main road. Being that there are many treacherous grades between Gregsville Yard and Rose Yard, NS most of the time will send their trains out of the yard with DPU, distributed power units, as to improve efficiency and save time. Farther north, we stumble across a famous spot for rail fans all over the country, the famed Haywick Diamond. This very diamond carried the LNN, NNW, and even the Southern back in the 60s and 70s. Now it's an extremely busy bottleneck across the system for both NS and CSX. However, all we caught on this particular day was CSX. The layout is still fairly similar to how it was back in the 70s, with the LNN and chassis system 2-track Gregsville to Rose Yard main line, now the CSX and NS on the bottom, the Southern and NNW single-track main line, now the CSX Landry sub on the top, and the connection between the two off to the left, also known by crews as the Landry connection. The rails start to make a tinging noise, and we hear on the scanner that CSX I-199, fresh out of the Rose Yard intermodal ramp 1.2 miles from here, is calling signals, and the signals just keep getting closer. Led by a CSX CM4400CW and closely followed by an ET44AH Tier 4, I-199 makes its pass across the famed Haywick Diamond. On the head end of I-199 are auto racks for the Gregsville automotive ramp, followed by an assortment of single-stacked and double-stacked containers. The train will make its way through towns and locations like Clarence Junction, Kokini, Belton, Forester, and Oakley Junction before following the Marlin River into the heart of Gregsville, where it'll change crews and continue on south. I-199 and its sister train I-198 are staples along the Gregsville sub, whether it's the southbound loaded I-199 or the empty returning northbound I-198. It's pretty hard to miss this train. Averaging between 10,000 and 13,000 feet every day, it's a behemoth of a train. But in classic CSX fashion, it normally only has 2 engines on it. We head a couple miles back south to get an overpass shot of him in Branklin. We pull into the quiet, peaceful town of Branklin. Peaceful till 199 gets here anyway. Brand new Vader shield signals have been put here on the north end. And since I was here just a few years ago, the left leg of the Y seems to have taken one hell of a beating. And sadly, according to a CSX bulletin released a couple days ago, it's scheduled to be ripped up later this year. 7216 leads 199 around the corner and through downtown Branklin. We get a little bit of a horn show as he passes underneath us. I was thankfully accompanied by a friend of mine who got some good shots of him from the ground. This train was big enough that his head end knocked down the signals at Clarence Junction, at the same time his EOT was passing us here in Franklin. Mind you, Clarence Junction is 2 miles away from here. Funny how big these trains can really get. You know, I'm not at all ashamed to say that I'm a little jealous of the people that live in those houses right across from the tracks. I think a lot of you guys would agree with me. Not wanting to miss out on any diamond action, we hurry our way back to Haywick, and just in time too. Although not lined for the diamond, the scanner lights up with G734, a long-haul grain train taking the Landry connection. Unironically, he's also bound for a crew change in Gregsville before continuing south. Led by a 90s era AC 4400 CW, although faded, it still reps its 90s YN2 paint scheme, and a gorgeous K5H air horn. The wheels make an ear-piercing squeal as they round the tight corner onto the Gregsville. I would love to live in Haywick, although I'm sure the people living here probably wish they had earmuffs. The max permissible speed through this curve is only 20, but as soon as he gets out on the main line, he can stretch the legs of those big GE and EMD engines he has on the head end. Although definitely not a Hotshot train, he can still drag that beast of a consist along at a pretty decent click. Having a scanner is definitely a huge advantage to catching more trains, although it might not help if you don't know what you're listening for. The conductor of G734 got on the radio saying, "You're looking alright, have a safe trip," and a new voice popped up acknowledging the comment. It's a railroad law to check passing trains to make sure they don't have any defects or problems, which is what I heard. And to confirm my suspicion of there being another train, a few seconds later, I hear a horn echoing through the hills. CSX Q543, another one of those mixed manifest shuttle trains I talked about earlier. With a very 90s to early 2000s lash up, the heavy manifest chugs its way across the diamond. Led by CSX SD60 8706, one of CSX's earlier EMD locomotives, followed by SD70 4679, which followed only a few years later, and third out an EMD SD40-3, a rebuild of the 80s era SD40-2. The train snakes its way through the valleys. Following the curves of the hills will bring it to a Y, where it'll meet up with the NS Juntersville district, and straight into the bustling Rose Yard. Overlooking the old diamond is one of very few interlocking towers still left on the CSX system, the famed Haywick Tower. The tower that watched big chugging Alcos pull red-hot passenger trains, hotshot piggyback trains, and amazing equipment we consider history today. Since those days on the railroad, engines, rolling stock, and traffic just keeps getting bigger. Rail cars can be up to 90 feet depending on the car, and trains can be up to 2.5 miles depending on the line. With precision scheduled railroading in full swing on the CSX, trains are pulling thousands and thousands of feet of train. Technically, one could argue there are fewer trains being moved, which might be true, but the ones you do see are always sure to be entertaining. The train begins to apply its brakes for the speed limit change in the yard. This train was big enough that its tail end was fouling the diamond when he started slowing for the yard. Keep in mind the yard is roughly 2 to 3 miles away from here. To be honest, I don't know how the hell they make these things fit in the sidings. Our last train for episode 1 was a pretty special one. Being a rail fan in the South, there is very few places you can find anything UP or BNSF related. Thankfully, the Gregsville is one of those places you can find that. The NS has a host of run-through trains including ethanol run-throughs and intermodal run-throughs. This is Hotshot 232, a super high priority intermodal train for NS. And being a run-through, it had a plethora of foreign power. All BNSF on this train, including head-end, mid-train DPU, and rear-end DPU. And he was screaming through the sleepy town of Belton. Also, being a rail fan in the South and Southeast, there's not a ton of places where you can get literally blown over by the wind off of a train. Well, this is definitely one of those few. If you guys want more of the Gregsville collection, stay tuned for next week's episode. Next week, we'll start the long tour from Rose Yard all the way to Gregsville, with many cool stops along the way. I love y'all, and I'll see you guys next week. Take care. Peace.